recording now, just so we have that all ready. If I can remind everyone that isn't the speaker to please make sure that you're muted, that you've muted your microphone so that we can keep the call nice and clear and that we can all hear John properly. Okay, so yeah, we're really delighted to welcome John today to the conference. John Vincent, talking about libraries of sanctuary. I'm really excited to hear what you have to say. So I will pass over to you. Everyone, please welcome John.
Thank you very much, Michelle. And sorry, in case I forget at the end, thank you very much for all your support, because although I've done quite a lot of Zoom courses and things recently, this is the first time where I'm tentatively taking control of my own slides. So I've been really grateful for all your help to get to this point. Right, I'm now going to attempt to share my screen and great. So if everybody can see that clearly, that's what we're going to be looking at in the next little while. I'm going to do a brief introduction to what I'm talking about. My aim is to talk for maybe 15-20 minutes, probably at something of a gallop, and then there'll be time at the end for questions, because the questions is often, I think, the most interesting bit, and we can pick up on things specifically. Very briefly, I worked in libraries since the 1960s, primarily in Hertfordshire, Lambeth, Enfield, and then since 1999, I've coordinated the network, and you can see our logo at the foot of the screen. We work around social justice and run courses and produce information and e-bulletins and contribute generally to things within libraries, archives, museums, and galleries. One of the areas of work that I'm really interested in is provision for what I'm going to shorthand as new arrivals, and I'll explain that in just a minute. So I'd like to just go through the outline for the afternoon. Here we are. So I've more or less done the introductions. I'm going to do a tiny bit on terminology, which I'll do now rather than doing it with a separate slide. In terms of what we're looking at, I work a lot with the City of Sanctuary movement, and they like the term people seeking sanctuary, and I'm really comfortable with that. But I think it often limits it in people's view to people who are refugees or asylum seekers. So I tend to use the term new arrivals, which also includes all those other people who come to the UK. So people who arrive here for work, people who arrive back in the UK or to the UK for the first time to be with their families, their partners, whatever. There's a whole range of people that are included in this definition, and that's what I'm going to try and cover very briefly this afternoon.
Sounds very interesting.
I've been working around this area personally. I was talking to somebody who was interviewing me yesterday for a project, personally really since the 1970s, I guess, but the big piece of work was around Welcome to Your Library, and I'll come to that in a moment. Then I'm going to talk about the City of Sanctuary movement, what that is, what libraries of sanctuary are, why all this is important, particularly right now, then a little bit at the end, which would be maybe an opening to discussion about, if you're interested, how can I get involved? So, libraries have got a long history of working with new arrivals. There was a particularly outstanding piece of work done in 1969 that looked at the developments in public libraries, particularly working with new arrivals back then. And it was a kind of groundbreaking piece of work because it surveyed what was happening across the UK and looked at the kinds of provision there was. And ever since then onwards, libraries of all kinds have been working to welcome new arrivals to their communities. The Welcome to Your Library project, which ran from 2003 to 2007, was funded by the Paul Hamlyn Foundation, and it was a way of moving this work up the practical and policy agendas. And I'll say briefly what happened, because there's not time to go into it in immense detail. There's loads of information, sort of legacy information about the project still on the network website, and the network website address is at the end of the presentation if anybody's interested in following it up. So basically, Welcome to Your Library had a pilot project which was London only, and then followed by the national project, which involves 6 partners across different parts of England. Some of the work, all the work that was developed was terrific, and I think all of it was groundbreaking. And a lot of it changed as the project ran on. So just as one example, we were going to be working with Liverpool because they were one of the places in Britain where asylum seekers were placed while they were waiting to be placed elsewhere. But during the life of the project, that changed. So we started working with Liverpool instead on how we supported workers who'd arrived in the UK, so particularly people from Eastern Europe. There were some strong legacies from the Welcome to Your Library project. One of them is something called the Network e-Bulletin, which is free. He said, quick plug, is free, available from me and still going after all this time. And there's also some really good continuing practice that you can pick up on with people and library services developing still what we were developing back then. But there's some dots and then more dots because a lot of this good work also disappeared. And I think I wanted to throw out 2 issues from that. The first is that I think some of it disappeared because political and maybe local library agendas changed. To be honest, in some quarters, there's never been political enthusiasm for doing this kind of work in libraries. And in other quarters there was, but only up to a point. And so once the political agenda changed or politicians decided this wasn't an area they wanted to concentrate on, it went back down the agenda. Allied to that, I think that there was a number of library authorities who said that once the Paul Hamlyn grant money had finished, they would mainstream the funding and it would continue. And then because of the sorts of things we all know happen, funding got shifted, funding got cut, and the funding didn't succeed for long. And I think my second issue that comes out of this whole piece of work is that whilst I think projects are terrific for getting things going and for testing the water and experimenting and maybe raising a report to raise something on the agenda, looking project funding only is really, really limited. Way back when we were looking at the start of work to tackle social exclusion, so we're talking the sort of, round about the turn of the new century, there was work going on in Wales to show that if we were to be really successful, work to tackle social exclusion would take something like 25 years. So a project that lasts for a year, frankly, might demonstrate the importance, but isn't going to get us very far. So it's about looking at how we can mainstream and really take this work forward in a more coordinated way. Okay, so I'm sure most of you have heard of the City of Sanctuary movement, so I'm just going to touch on it here just to say what it was, just in case you haven't heard. So it started in Sheffield in 2005, and Sheffield became the first City of Sanctuary. It's now a UK-wide movement, and it's widened out from cities. So the Wandsworth, for example, has just become a borough of sanctuary. There are counties of sanctuary, and there are also, as it says here, groups and streams. So the streams, for example, include things like universities of sanctuary, gardens of sanctuary. There are health streams, and there are a growing number of groups, some place-based, some thematically based, and it's looking at how all of these organizations, places, universities, groups, gardens, libraries, how they can offer a welcome to people who are seeking sanctuary here in the UK. One of the latest streams is libraries. And I wish they'd chosen a library with an easier name to say. Thimble Mill Library in Sandwell is the UK's first library of sanctuary. There have been a number since, Brighton and Hove, Southampton, the Kittiwake Multicultural Library in Newcastle, to give you some example. And there's a number of other libraries that are in the throes of applying. And I think once the COVID restrictions lift a bit, there'll be a flood of new library services that are getting accredited as libraries of sanctuary. Following on from the work in Sandwell, the work continued in the West Midlands, which led to the production of the Libraries of Sanctuary Resource Pack, which I wrote in conjunction with a brilliant team. So working with libraries in the West Midlands, particularly Birmingham and Coventry, libraries in the Northwest, particularly Manchester and Oldham, and then working with the Arts Council, Libraries Connected, and of course the City of Sanctuary movement itself. And the web address for the resource pack is there. It was published last May. We were intending to have a huge launch event tying in with Refugee Week last year, but of course something else intervened. So our aim is still to have a launch maybe sometime next year to kind of revive the pack. But I know from feedback that it's being used regularly, and more library services are taking it forward. So, as I said, one of the things I wanted to look at is, why are libraries of sanctuary important in 2021? I think anything that a library of any kind does to welcome people is clearly critical. One of the issues that we've heard about, well, I've been working in libraries since I was a Saturday assistant. I was only 4 in 1966. And during the whole of that time from then till now, I've seen libraries doing really well, welcoming people, making everybody feel welcome. But I've also seen the opposite. I've seen libraries that seem to put up barriers, seem to stop people being that welcome. And we need to look at that on what's happening. But there's also 3 really huge background issues. And I'd love to talk more, but there isn't time. So I'm just going to touch on them and hope that if you're interested, you can ask questions or follow up or email me, whatever you like. So firstly, have people heard of the hostile environment? I'm hoping so, but I've done quite a lot of work around it recently, and I'm still running across people who've never heard of it. So just in case you haven't, a very, very brief introduction. So the hostile environment started as a government strategy in around 2006, but it came to the fore in 2012, 2013, and it was an attempt by the government to deter people from coming to the UK and to make things as difficult as possible for people who arrived here. You may think, oh, you know, Britain, as we keep hearing, the UK's got this wonderful record of welcoming people. Well, we do, but we also don't. You may not have heard of this because it seems to have got rather covered up. But during 2016, the government actually had vans going around parts of East London with signs telling people to go home. And it's just extraordinary that in a country like Britain, we could be allowing that to happen. The additional issue that has come up, and you will have heard of this because it's being covered so much at the moment, is the effects that the hostile environment strategy had on the so-called Windrush generation. So people that Britain invited here to work, to live, to be part of our community, they were invited in a very specific way. And then 50 years later or so, people are being told that they don't have the correct paperwork. There have been endless cases of people, going back to the Caribbean, for example, for a holiday or to see family or for some other reason, and then not being allowed back into the UK. We know that it was on the news last night that although there is supposed to be compensation being paid to people who were swept up in this, the levels of application and levels of payout are horrendously low. So that is a big contributing factor. And it's still happening. The next thing I've mentioned is migration issues, and the two now kind of bleed into each other. Again, you probably know, right now, and it closes tomorrow night, the government is consulting on its new immigration strategy. And it's basically moving to a position where, frankly, anybody who tries to get into the UK to claim asylum is treated with suspicion and as though they have no right to do so. It seems to disregard the fact that we are part of a worldwide movement which under legislation allows people to claim sanctuary, and it's asylum seeking is an entirely legal thing to do. But the migration issues that are continuing through that are grim. Allied to that, we've got Brexit and its after effects, and the fact that people who, again, have moved here entirely legitimately suddenly are finding their rights here to be questioned, and they're having to go through all sorts of hoops to stay here, to keep on living in the UK, to continue to take part in things in the UK. And I think we've also seen and know that one of the horrendous after effects of Brexit has been the increase in racism, antagonism, threats, hate towards people from elsewhere. And as an aside, again, was something on the news yesterday about the spike in hatred and aggression towards people from China and other places in the East after the COVID pandemic. So there's a whole bag of things around migration and Brexit. What that means is that new arrivals may struggle indeed to get here and may not have any of the bases that they need to thrive in the UK. So what they're looking for, and where we come in, is a need for information, advice, support, signposting. And it's those kinds of things that libraries do really well. There have been some terrific pieces of work done. And some of it's very small scale. It's like having a library that has a welcome sign up, for example, or has welcomes in other languages, so that people feel that there's something there that they can recognize, that staff understand something of the journeys that they've had to get here and what kind of issues they face, because I think that's one of the really key things. And I might come back to that if I've got myself 2 seconds afterwards. Actually, I'll do it just before I get to the slide. One of the areas that I'm really interested in, for example, I identify as a queer man. And one of the areas that I've been looking at particularly is what happens to people who are fleeing their country for fear of losing their lives because they are LGBTQ+. And I think I can't describe it. I can only imagine the fear that they must have when they go into a huge library or other building where their previous experiences have been ones of discrimination, hate, threat, impending violence, impending death. And it's something where I think we all need to be more and more aware and find out more and get involved more in how we can support people in those kind of positions. So how can I get involved? The first basic thing to look at is is your organisation a place of sanctuary? So you might work in a university library and the university has declared itself to be a university of sanctuary. You might be in one of the increasing numbers of local authorities that are declaring themselves as local authority places of sanctuary. There's a whole range of places now. You might have a link with something in the community that's a place of sanctuary. So look at those. If there isn't, if you're not part of that, is there an opportunity to develop that? For example, is there a local City of Sanctuary group? If you have a look at the City of Sanctuary website, you'll find links to groups all over the UK, and you can link up with a local group, talk to them about the sorts of things you're interested in. If your library decides that it wants to become a library of sanctuary, your local City of Sanctuary group is the place to start, because they can guide you through the application process. They can help you evaluate how you're doing. Even if you don't go down that more formal route, they're a brilliant starting place. Then look at the thing that we've mentioned earlier on. How welcoming is your library to everybody? Is every single member of staff welcoming everybody who comes in? Does the building feel open, or does it feel like there are barriers to moving everywhere? How welcoming is the signage and the whole layout of the building? Or is it actually something where you have to be in the know to find your way around? It's those kind of key issues that we need to think about. And the one that I'm really interested in, I think, because I'll do it and then I'll answer my own question, is how aware are your colleagues of the sorts of issues new arrivals may face? And I think this is the one I'm of all of them, the one I'm really interested in, because I don't think any of us will ever know the answer to this. So it's about finding out more and more and more, talking to people, learning from people, developing our empathy skills, becoming more and more understanding, getting involved in things so that we can see the sorts of issues that people are facing, talking to people in local groups and local communities. In Birmingham, where I've been doing quite a lot of work, for example, there's a terrific guy who's the local authority asylum seeker link person, and he is a really good ally, and he's been bringing families to the library and helping them join and helping them get involved in events. So finding colleagues and other people in the community that you can link with is a really, really strong way in. And that's me. So the network website's there, my email address is there. If anybody would like to email me, do feel free. I'm really happy to hear from people, comments on this, things you might add, things that you're doing that I'd be interested in, we'd all be interested in. Do get in touch if you want to. And I'm going to now stop sharing so that we can talk to each other for 5 minutes.
And that was fantastic. Thank you so much, John. I knew it would be a really great session, so thank you so much.
Thank you.
I've got one question in the chat so far. So someone that works in a university library that is closed to the public, and they're wondering if there are ways that they can adopt the principles of a place of sanctuary for their students who are new arrivals.
Absolutely, yes. I think that I'll do an aside and then you'll see where I'm coming from. My partner teaches in a university in a university, and through him I know a lot about the kinds of issues that students there are facing, and what they're looking for often is just somebody who will be a point of contact, somebody that they can talk to, somebody who might signpost them to things they need. So there's also, I'm sure you know this, there's the Student Action for Refugee organisation, STAR, and they're also terrific at linking students to initiatives around sanctuary. I think a library in a university, even if the university hasn't yet decided to register as a university of sanctuary, would be a really good welcoming starting point. I'm going to say something slightly naughty now. I'm writing, this bit isn't, but the second bit is. I'm writing a book at the moment for Facet Publishing, the CILIP publishing arm, looking at the responses by all kinds of libraries to new arrivals to the UK. And one of the things that I'm really trying to pin down is the kind of support that university libraries might offer. And I haven't got very far so far. I've had a brilliant response from somebody in the College of Further Ed, and I'm working with her to look at the sorts of things that they offer, like a conversation cafe and ESOL classes and so on. But I'm really interested in other things that university libraries might do. So maybe not through the chat, because there isn't a lot of time, but if anybody wanted to get in touch with some examples, I'd be delighted to hear from you.
Fantastic. Yeah, one of the reasons I was really interested in attending this is obviously I work at Coventry University, and Coventry is a city of peace and reconciliation. So I really feel like, we should be on top of this. We should be University of Sanctuary. All of our libraries should be libraries of sanctuary, all of that kind of stuff. So I'm going to go away and really have a lot of thinking about this and what we can do, and how I can convince my library management team to get more involved.
That sounds great. And if there's anything I can do as well, I'd be really interested in just sort of following that through with you, Michelle.
Fantastic, thank you. I've got a question. Will new arrival replace illegal immigrant?
People don't like the term new arrival, so I purposely do a big bit in the introduction about why I'm using it. Let me do 2 seconds on the terms. So City of Sanctuary use the term people seeking sanctuary because they want to emphasize the people bit, not their refugee status. And I completely understand that. And I think that's a really, really positive way forward. But people seeking sanctuary isn't the whole of what we're covering, which is why I've tended to use the term new arrivals instead, because it also, as I've said, covers people who've come here pre-Brexit or cover people who are here to work. And I'm going to be bossy sounding now. There is no such thing as an illegal immigrant. It is not a term that should ever be used. Under the Geneva Convention, which is where all of this got signed up to, everybody has the right to claim asylum if they're in fear of their lives because of, and there's a whole set of things, but primarily because of religion, social groups, and so on. So the government will keep talking about illegal immigrants as though somehow Britain's getting overrun by people who are getting in here who shouldn't. The reason that they may be getting into Britain in a, what's the right word? An underground, in inverted commas, way, is that we've made it so difficult for people to actually claim asylum here anyway. So what we tend to see through the news is the really grim examples, like the terrible deaths of the people from Vietnam recently, or much earlier, the cockle pickers in Morecambe Bay. People who've arrived here maybe clandestinely because it's not been easy to get here, or they've been brought here by people traffickers who tell them they're going to get them into the UK legally and they've just dumped them. So there's a whole lot of things I think we need to unpick about the language, and there isn't time now. In fact, I think I'm almost out of time now, but it's a really, really interesting topic, and hopefully people will be interested enough to pick up on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I hope so. We've had I don't know if you've been able to have a look at the chat, but we've got a lot of people kind of sharing their experiences, and yeah, would like to say thank you so much to everybody who's joined in the chat and added their kind of their personal lived experiences. And yeah, hopefully this has inspired lots of people to get involved and get engaged in the City of Sanctuary, libraries of Sanctuary, petition your local council, everything, I guess,
Yeah.
to really get involved. So I'd love for you all to join me in saying a big thank you to John for joining us today. Lots of people in the chat saying thank you. And yeah, once again, thanks from us, John. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you. And thank you everybody who's taken part. I'm watching the chat and there's some really brilliant points coming. Thank you.
Okay, we are going to stop recording